Welcome to another edition of A Voice to the Gentile Church. I'm Jim Wingerter. Next to me is Pastor Roger Diaz, and next to him is Dolores Lowe. So we are going to begin tonight with recognizing the death of a man who is very close to us, Rabbi Eliezer Waldman of the Yeshiva Kiryat Arba in Israel. And we're kind of struggling a little bit with that. At least I did. I always had the hope for him that he would be here with us when Jesus comes. Now I'm not sure we will be either, but he surely in our mind he will be returning with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That might be a bold statement to say.
So that's a whole theological stuff. But we just wanted to remember Rabbi Waldman and his immense faith, pioneer in the land of Israel. Halutz, certainly someone who paved the way for faith, emunah, in the land of Israel movement. Now, there's a subject that we can talk about concerning the president of Chile.
Yep.
Very anti-Semitic, very hateful of Israel. Anti-Semitism has morphed into anti-Israelism. In the Jewish community, you have capitulation on a scale that's comparable to pre-Nazi era. And so there seems to be a divide occurring between anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism. So this president is extremely anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic. And he made some statements about Israel, right, about the so-called settlers, the same people that Rabbi Waldman have devoted his life to fostering, encouraging, and positioning on the mountains of Israel. So we see Rabbi Waldman as a hero, and we need to see 1,000 more like him.
Right.
But the world sees him as a terrorist,
Mm-hmm.
and our statements can be regarded as terror to the world for sure. I mean, the world system. I mean, this president, what's his name?
Gabriel Boric.
Boric?
Mm-hmm. Yes, Boric. Boric.
All right. So it doesn't sound very Iberian.
No.
sounds a little German. We won't get into that, at least not yet. So this president is reflecting the sentiment of the world order, of this system, this government that's being positioned in the world. It's so obvious, right?
Yep.
He's being faithful to it. And suddenly he's talking about the people on the mountains of Israel, the so-called settlers. Mm-hmm. He made a statement about a gift that was offered to him by Israel, right?
Well, actually, during Rosh Hashanah, they sent him honey, right? Because it's the Jewish New Year,
right?
The secular Jewish New Year, and honey and apples are a thing to eat, right? So they sent him honey, and his response was to tell the people that it was a very nice gift, but that instead of sending him gifts, they should be telling Israel to give back the occupied land. So that was he obviously aligns with that thought process that the Palestinians are the true Israelis and that the Israelis...
You can't be embracing the Bible on any level. I mean, this territory that they refer to as the occupied West Bank is Judea and Samaria.
Right.
It is the ancient ground where everything, well, not quite everything, but just about everything happened.
Yep.
After 70 AD and the wars that followed, the Bar Kokhba War, the revolts, and all of those realities, rendered the land of Israel not completely desolate of inhabitants, but pretty close to it. I mean, there were still healthy communities in the Galilee and in the Golan. In Judea, there was some. Jerusalem was a hotspot for people to concentrate. It always has been since the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. But there's always been, and the history reports this, there's always been an influx of sons of Israel. You say Jews, yes, Jews, but sons of Israel. They've been coming in. They made many inroads into Israel during the 2,000-year diaspora period or 1,500-year diaspora period, and so there always has been Jews, sons of Israel in the land of Israel. At many points, there were more Jews in the land of Israel than Bedouins and Arabs during that 2,000-year period, when the land was called Palestine. Who called the land Palestine? Did God refer to the land as Palestine? So if you're biblically minded, you shouldn't say Palestine, because it was the emperor of Rome, Hadrian, was it?
Yes.
I think so.
That
Yes.
named the land Palestine.
After the ancient foe of David.
He wanted
Right.
he wanted to slap the nation of Israel across the face and said, okay, you continue to rebel, Bar Kokhba revolt and Masada and on. We're going to name this land after your dreaded enemy, the Palestinians. And so Hadrian, a Roman emperor, named the land Palestine. And as a Christian, if you go along with that mindset, with that reality, you're embracing the word of an emperor above the word of God, because God calls the land Israel.
Right.
So if you're a person in the world and that's your ideology, and then it's fine. You can call the land Zimbabwe, as far as I'm concerned, or Holland if you want. But the land, from a biblical point of view, is the land of Israel. The covenant that God cut with Abraham and the children of Israel is indelibly connected to the land. And God said that this is an eternal covenant. So the land of Israel is the land of Israel. You can call it Palestine all you want. World leaders today are just grappling with each other to be first in line to condemn Israel, including our leadership. Our friends to the north, Canada, there was a conservative prime minister in Canada. He was moved out. He was very pro-Israel.
Right, he was very pro-Israel.
And then came
Trudeau, right?
Trudeau. In lockstep with the world movement, with the world government. And they're all trying to outdo each other to see who's going to be the most anti-Israel. Well, it's part of this world system that's coming into being. And people like Rabbi Wallman, the late Rabbi Wallman, are the impediments to their movement. So we pray that there would be 1,000 more like Rabbi Wallman, and I believe there are.
10,000.
I believe
Yeah.
there are. And in time to come, this would become more of a pressing issue for this world system, for these world leaders, the kings of the world, that are just chomping at the bit to condemn the people that we consider friends and people of faith. They're just so. This puts us in the same category as them, but I'm not afraid of it.
So when George Bush, H.W., was president, he made the declaration for a new world order, and Rabbi Wallman, who was in the Knesset at that time, stood up and said, I don't know what you're talking about. In my Bible, God already has formulated a new world order.
Yeah, James Baker so it's again, this is a, you look at the Bush Senior's administration and their policy towards Israel, and they were like the prototype, I think, to the future world system. I mean, he's the guy that said it's time for a new world order, right?
He's a Rhodes
Right.
Scholar. We were talking about that last week.
So you have this reality where Bush Senior, very conservative, very Christian, paved the way for the way that world governments of the world, ultimately a world government, should relate to Israel. See the people that are standing in Judea and Samaria as great impediments of faith, as terrorists. What did Biden say last week, right? We talked about it. What did Biden actually say last week? That the impediment to peace in the Middle East are these settlements.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's in
Baker
lockstep.
said that 40 years ago.
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
nothing new
So
under the sun.
we're seeing this incredible impetus in the world, and places like Chile, who knows, Australia, all of these countries are just falling right into lockstep with the whole movement. The Pope is promoting this on the highest of levels. This is incredible time to be alive and to have a biblical perspective.
So yeah,
Amazing.
the big danger in South America is you have Venezuela that is now outright communist with Maduro. You have Peru's latest government, also very leftist. Another, he says he's socialist, but he's really communist.
Bolivia.
Yep, Chile now. So the only conservative government true conservative government that you have in South America right now is Brazil and Colombia.
Guyana and Suriname, but who considers them, you know?
Right. So Colombia has a long memory, right? They remember the battle that they've had with Shining Path for so long, right?
Yeah.
So they realize what's going on. This is a shame because Chile was one of the leading economies in South America, right? Chile instituted so we're in the U.S., we have the Social Security system. I don't know if you remember Freeman, the famous American economist. Chile actually consulted him before installing their retirement system.
Yes.
And instead of going into a government-owned 401k where you only get, 2%, they actually have a retirement system that's based on the stock market, right?
The growth of the economy, right.
So you have a choice. You can not participate in the retirement system, or you can participate in the retirement system and it goes along with the stock market.
Absolutely. I remember when that transpired. But you know, we know, and we talked about this pre-program today, between Argentina and Chile, that mountain range, there are Andes that cuts right down through those two countries. There is just an infestation of Nazism, neo-Nazism. They're real, not neo-Nazism guys who shave their heads and tattoo themselves with swastikas, but real neo-Nazism. I'm talking about second, third generation sons of Nazis, actual Nazis, who hid in that mountain range between Chile and Argentina. So I'm not surprised that we're seeing this type of sentiment coming out from that region. Argentina, even in recent history, has been horribly anti-Semitic.
And remember, the Pope came from there, right?
Oh, yeah. And he is a communist. He is certainly a part of that movement.
It is absolutely a shame because South America has been poor for so long. I mean, it doesn't matter what country you look at, right? Historically, their economies are bad. They've been poor. And now they're falling in line with the communist system, which is only going to make them poorer. I mean, Chile's fought this battle before. People forget that Pinochet created the coup in Chile and became the leader in Chile because he was fighting the communists. They forget that.
But you have to remember, Dolores, there's a certain historiography that's associated with all of South America, perhaps with the exception of Guyana, Suriname, French Guyana, and Cayenne. With those exceptions, South America is mired in Jesuit suppression and oppression. It has been that way since the Inquisition, since the Spanish Inquisition. It was the Dominicans who flooded the Americas, South America, Central America, Caribbean, with their Jesuit agenda. It started off as holding back, suppressing Protestant reform movement, and then Jewish conversion, conversion to Christianity. That was their big issue, that these forcibly converted Jews of South America would revert. And so they flooded the Americas. When I say the Dominicans, the Jesuits, they flooded the Americas with the intent to hold back these things. But then as time went along, they became politically vested in the lands of South America and Central America. And now we're seeing communism that comes from the whole Jesuit movement. I mean, this Pope, Francis, is a Jesuit. He's the first Jesuit Pope ever. He's the most communistic world order Pope ever. I mean, much more so than Benedict. And of course, we know that from what we know of Pope John Paul II, he was nowhere in that place that this Pope is in. So we're seeing that horrible agenda that consumed South America.
Well, and the bad thing
Bolsonaro in Brazil is a standout, but Brazil is a seeding pot of, it's going to go that way eventually. And so,
well, the bad thing is I equate communism with cancer in the human body. it can go into remission, which is what has happened in certain countries.
Well,
but it never goes away. Yes.
You fled, literally ran through the forest
Yep.
of Cuba, trying to get away from people that were trying to kill you and your family.
Yep. And it never, once you commit to communism, it's almost like you're poisoned and it never goes away. It may become a little less in that, like, the Russians now allow their people to travel, but they're still communists. Vietnam may now have an economy that tries to do market economy,
Right.
but they're still communists.
So does China.
Exactly. They're
Yeah.
still communists. There's still oppression. And it's like a cancer. It never goes away.
And the people who've been oppressed by it, they'll never forget it. Remember, we used to go to that little place after church for lunch. They did, food.
Yes, pho.
They did pho, right? And,
Yeah.
and we were over there one time, and this is before the elections of 2019. And the proprietor of the place, the woman that owned it, she said, if Trump loses, I'm shutting this business down and I'm moving. Because she was a hardcore, we would say she's a conservative Republican, but no, she was very leery of what she was seeing on the left. She recognized, because she's from Vietnam. She saw what happened to Vietnam. Right. And this person was passionate. Many Vietnamese, in fact, most Vietnamese are very anti-communist, very anti-socialist. You can't even hint socialism to them, and you see the reaction.
Right.
So the Vietnamese that are here, right?
Right.
Because
The
the
ones that are
Vietnamese
here,
that are
yes.
in Vietnam have acquiesced.
the ones who had to flee. So
Right.
listen, communism has done nothing but destroy lives, countries, has brought nothing but mayhem, no peace, no love, no unity, only discord and confusion and disarray. You're a living example of that.
Yep.
And so where I come from in Trinidad in 1982, I saw a government that was socialist, that the people wanted to continue to support regardless of their corruption. And in 1982, I said, that's it. I love my country. I'm to the bone a Trinidadian, but I'm walking away from this because I love my freedom. And I'm not going to be part of a system that's going to fall into socialism and later on communism. But it never happened. But guess what? With COVID, it's happening now.
Right.
It's
happening here.
With every bit of the pressure that we're seeing as a result of this sickness, we're seeing countries bowing down to a world communist order. So it doesn't look good for freedom-loving people like me.
Right.
All right? And the future doesn't look real bright, but like you said, it can go into remission, but I'm not sure if this will ever stop masticizing.
Right. Well, and under this administration, they're trying really hard. Like Biden's nominee for banking, Secretary of Banking or whatever it was called, was an outright communist. She went to school in Russia.
Most of the people on the left and
Yes.
even in the media are avowed communists.
Yes. And she actually said that there should be no such thing as personal bank accounts, that all funds should be held by the federal government and doled out to you. So you're back to getting your, what do you give your kids when?
I can't even calibrate that.
I know.
We work for what we have.
Yes.
We've worked all our lives for
Yes.
what we now have.
Yes.
I had an interesting experience this morning. I got up early. I didn't want to, real early. I didn't want to. I had something I had to take care of. And so by the time 6 o'clock rolled around, I'm saying, okay, I'm not going to even try and catch another hour of sleep. I'm just going to stay up and run the day. So at 7 o'clock, I just came to mind, go have yourself a bagel from Bagel King, because the gluten content in their bagels treat me well, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
I said, okay, I'll go have a bagel and Nova, and my favorite little dish from this one place that I go to. And I'm walking up to the door, and at the same time comes a gentleman. He's walking at the door. We're both approaching the door at the same time. I defer to him. He opens the door, goes in. I walk into the restaurant. I chose a table. He chose a table right next to me. And generally, I avoid, interacting with people and just meeting people.
Right.
It's my personality. I have a strange personality, but that's me. All of a sudden, I'm sitting there, and something prompts me to interact with him, which is very unlike me. So, and he's pushing that interaction as well. Well, we sat there for about 20 minutes, and everything I know about the world system, he knew. Everything. He was a believer. He talked a lot about the hope of the cross and the hope of the coming of Jesus. Everything, I mean, we were so in sync in everything. He knew what I was coming with. I knew what he was coming with. And the people around us was very disturbed.
Yeah.
Very disturbed. And so it's a very liberal type place, you see.
Yes, yes.
So I sat there and I wondered, why did he left, I walked out, and I wondered, why did that happen? I mean, why did I decide to come to this one place for a bagel, and at the very same time we walked to the door and we sat together, and suddenly you don't find many people that think like me.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm sitting there and I'm saying, oh, why is this happening? And we didn't exchange information, and we left. And so I'm saying, what's going on here? Maybe God is saying that there are people in the world who think the way you do, and it's okay to be different. You know, we're going to talk about counterculturalism here in a few moments, and it's okay to be against the culture of the world. Well, as we're going to talk about here in a moment, this is the experience of God's people. Mm-hmm. Historically, this has always been the experience of God's people, that you're against the culture. Now, the culture of the world is being formed right before us. What we're experiencing right now is much like what happened before World War I and II, those great paradigm shifts where the entire world began to see and think differently. That's what we're facing right now. So there's coming a global paradigm shift and all of the effects that will follow. The world is changing right before us, and people like us, we're going to be very, very standout. Mm-hmm. We're going to be very standout-ish. I saw it at the restaurant. I mean, I'm speaking with this guy right next to me, and there's a cluster of people all around me, and I look at them from time to time, and they give you that look like, what planet are they from? But there were people who realized that this was just a chance encounter. These guys are now meeting each other for the first time, but they're perfectly synced in what they're saying. So the hope is that what we believe would actually affect people, and people will hear it, see it, recognize it to be real, even though we wouldn't like it. There was a time that I took a lot of blows for being a conspiracy theory. I would love to talk to those people today. They're probably hiding away somewhere, and I understand why. But, you know, I thought about that quite a bit recently. I am not alarmed about what we're seeing today. I'm pretty peaceful, which is amazing, right? I'm pretty peaceful about it.
Expected it.
Exactly. I spent decades in
Well, and
preparation.
on top of that, there's not that we can do about it other than be on our knees
That's
in
right.
prayer.
But the people
Exactly.
who lived in denial
right,
are now hiding.
Yeah.
right.
They're saying to the rocks and the caves, hide us from what's coming.
Right.
Yep.
You have to face these things head on. You have to embrace them. Conflict can make or break you if you prepare yourself for it, if your mind is set that, yeah, there's coming a difficulty, even in dealing with family issues. If you're seeing something and you don't want to deal with it, but it's there, but you face it down and it happens, guess what? You're prepared to deal with it. If you live in denial about anything and it suddenly pops on you, it's gonna pubble you.
Right.
And that's just a fact. So the world is going headlong into this
Yep.
new paradigm. People who have been in denial will suffer the most.
Yeah.
So
I don't know how else to say it.
a last note, which you can find.
I took over your whole
No,
segment.
that's okay. That's okay. Which can be funny and sad at the same time. Senator Rand Paul, who's a libertarian, does an annual Festivus report. And for those of you who don't know what Festivus is, it's a made-up holiday that was on the Seinfeld show, right? and you have a poll, and you have a Festivus Day. So every year he does.
Seinfeld's not a libertarian.
Right. But every year he does a Festivus report where he outlines waste in government spending, right? So this year's Festivus report covered $52 billion, included $549 million worth of aircraft that we just left in Afghanistan because who cares
Hey,
about
a tip. Have a tip.
Exactly.
Hey, it's Christmas.
But it also included $565,000 to figure out if pigeons could play slot machines. Don't know why. And another $300,000 to verify that kids crave junk food. Like, no parent
Right. Would figure that
would
out
figure
on their
that
own
out, right?
quickly.
It's a
McDonald's
good time to be
wouldn't
a
be in
pigeon.
business.
What can I tell you?
I have a feeling, though, the pigeons didn't get the money.
True. Absolutely true. So, and then $25 million so that New York could have art in public spaces.
They've
And-
had art in public spaces without anyone handing them money.
That's so essential.
And unbelievably, even though we can't build border walls in the U.S., we gave $250 million to the Middle East so that they could build a border wall. So,
So who built the border wall? You don't mean Israel.
no.
No.
It's between the Middle East and North Africa. So
Yeah.
it's
Oh.
got to be like in that, Libya.
That's right. I forgot. They hate
I'm
each
gonna-
other.
I'm going to
Yes.
hold back. I'm going to hold back my sentiments.
So our tax dollars being well spent.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now the art that they're trying to promote on the streets of New York, do you suppose it has anything to do with the art that's been torn down and vandalized?
That would be amazing, wouldn't it? At the same time that we're tearing down art, we're spending money to put art in.
Makes me
public
wonder
spaces.
what the essence of the new art is going to
Right.
be. Perhaps like what we talked about last week, that wonderful gift that came from what city in Mexico? Whatever. What's the name of that place?
Oaxaca.
Oaxaca.
Yes.
I might have said
type
that
of
good.
art. Yeah, it'll be that type of art.
Maybe it's that type of art that
Hockey.
Oh, and then they spent another $25 million to figure out if good news and bad news affect you emotionally. If you hear good news. So, I'm
Well,
sorry.
wow.
It's sad. It's really sad. But
How much? 25 million?
Million.
Yeah, it's,
I wish I could have done that.
So
study.
to
Some
someone,
things.
they said, I'm going to give you $25 million for just feeling good about the fact that I gave you $25 million.
Yeah, that'd be the first
Which,
success,
you know,
right?
who wouldn't?
Yes. So it's sad. It's
Yeah.
absolutely sad.
yeah. Wow.
Anyway,
Well, we have
But-
an excellent question.
But with all of what Dolores just said, we cannot tolerate someone renovating their kitchen in the land of Israel.
oh yes, that would
In
be
Judea,
horrible,
Samaria,
right?
if you would to extend to open your window too widely, the entire world system will come down upon you. Now this is hypocrisy. I think it's beyond hypocrisy. You can't even call it hypocrisy. This is what? This is good and evil. Good is called evil. Evil is called good. No, it goes way beyond that. This is man's tyranny that's unfolding right before us. This is the devil's ministry,
Yep.
his outworking, and it will soon, with Mashiach, it will soon come to an end. So now something less dire.
Okay. So the question that was raised is this. Christmas is such an awkward time for me and my family. I choose not to celebrate, but family members do. Over the years, I've learned how to overcome this pressure, which was not easy. What is really difficult for me is dealing with the immense pseudo-Christian cultural pressures that come from every direction at this time of the year. Christians treat me like I'm the Antichrist, and unbelievers treat me like I'm from another world. How do you deal with this?
In one sentence?
Right. No, that's a one loaded question.
I can understand the question well. It's one that I can relate to myself. Of course, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been walking in this for decades now, 3 decades. So I fully understand the pressure, and it's immense. It's to call it the immense pseudo-Christian cultural pressures. Yeah, it's real. It's real. How do you deal with it? Now we'll try and take a shot at answering the question. First of all, I want to say that I'm happy, kind of rejoicing that we're not going to try and give the historic foundation for Christmas, the pagan foundation for Christmas. We all know it's pagan. And so we've done programs like this before. I've given messages about this, trying to provide the foundation, the basis for Christmas, not having anything to do with Jesus at all and historic Christianity. So we're not going to go into all of that. In fact, I would say to folks, if this troubles you, go get Encyclopedia Britannica, if you can still get such a thing, and look up the origin of Christmas. It predates Jesus by 250 years. Matter solved. I mean, we don't have to try and prove it. Go into the history of Saturnalia and Mithra and all of the rest. Just Encyclopedia Britannica, origin of Christmas, predates Jesus by 250 years. So that settles it. We're not going to go into it. It's a tiring issue for me because, for me to espouse something, I have to be passionate about it. It has to be very relevant for me to really get behind it. And when it's just old history, we've done this a dozen times, the passion isn't there unless I'm speaking to people who's never heard this before.
Right.
And there are probably some people listening right now that has never heard this before, so we'll probably schedule another program for this. But right now we're going to stick to the question, how does one deal with the incredible social pressures that comes with not celebrating Christmas? And what was said there is so real. As a Christian, if you don't celebrate Christmas, other Christians will see you as sort of a anti-God, an anti-Christ type, like it states in the question. Yeah, what's wrong with you? And you know what? I realized that since the sickness, the global sickness, people have become incredibly more defensive of Christmas than in the past. And I think the whole episode of this sickness, the pandemic, has caused people to really value their culture more than before.
So, funny enough, I was at the doctor's office today getting a test done. And the technician had Christmas music in the background. Mm-hmm. And he looks at me and says, "Oh, you have a high." First he was going to tell me, I love Christmas music. And then he goes, "Oh, I see you're high. So you don't like Christmas music." And sometimes I get into the whole explanation, right?
Yeah.
Which can take a long time, but frankly, today I was just tired and I didn't want to deal with it. And I was like, that's okay. Your Christmas. Yeah. I have nothing against your Christmas music. Go ahead and play your Christmas music.
Right.
But if I had said I'm a Christian and I don't celebrate Christmas, he probably would have lost it. Right?
Yeah. Well, that's the point. Other Christians will treat you like you're a traitor. Mm-hmm. You're mutiny. You're mutinous.
Let me just say before you go further, it's not just Christmas. When we got biblical, we abandoned Halloween. Sure. We abandoned St. Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day.
Easter is even worse, right? Right. They get really crazy when you say you don't celebrate Easter.
Right.
But the strength of the cultural celebration of Christmas becomes evident more so because it's much more tied into our culture. The commercialization of it, mm-hmm. even the spirit of the holiday spirit is very real. It's palatable. You can actually taste it. It's all around you. And what creates such an overwhelming or overriding sense of a spirit in a community? Well, the people, the spirits or the attitudes the behavior of the people in that community. So what's fostering this holiday season spirit is the people themselves. They are suddenly, some of them, considering God. You know, I post on Facebook every night biblical memes that I make up. And I make the memes and I send them out. I do it every night. It's a ritual for me. One of my few rituals, but it's a ritual. And during the year, I have a certain amount of responses. Well, at Christmas time, I've realized over the last 3 years since I've been doing it, at Christmas time, there's an uptick in responses, about a 25% uptick. So people become more God-focused. They become generally better people.
And that is a positive attribute.
Right.
You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, people
So
would say.
okay, people become, for a couple of 3 weeks, they become more focused on God, but it's superficial, right? It's not real. And they become better people. They'll give you a parking spot at Walmart or something. But
It's short-lived.
It's superficial. Now, we're not going to get into the pagan root foundation of Christmas, but it's not real. It's false. It's a culture that's built. It's a house of cards type thing. It's not real. If we were really that people, we would be that way in August. But we're not.
Sure.
We're not that people. So how do you deal with that? As a Christian, you have that rejection factor. And people generally don't want to be rejected. I don't want to be rejected. I know people in general, we hate rejection. We love to know or think that we're a part of the culture. It's much easier to be culturally grounded than not. So counterculturalism is the biggest setback in this whole issue of Christmas, no Christmas, Halloween, no Halloween, Easter, no Easter. It's being counterculture. So we'll talk about being counterculture here for a moment. Now, God's people has always been pressed with this issue. It's a heavy stone to carry. Always has been. It goes all the way back to Egypt, actually. It's always been difficult for the people of God to carry this heavy stone of not being tied into the culture. Okay, now we know that, right? It's obvious. Now, to do this, to be countercultural and to not celebrate Christmas in a culture that's given over to it fully, for many people, their income depends on Christmas.
Right.
For that 1 month period that goes from Christmas into New Year's, there are many people in our culture that they make their living during that time, and they coast the rest of the year. So it's a very powerful factor, right? So for us to carry this heavy stone, it's difficult, and sometimes you pay a heavy toll. In many cases, people will just reject you, ostracize you, family members, business partners, and so on. You'll just receive that type of ostracization.
Yes.
But yeah, God's people have always experienced this, and there's always been a very heavy toll connected to this. You have to have the very strongest of conviction to carry that heavy stone and not just be beaten into the ground. Now, when God prepared Israel for diaspora, right? We're talking 722 BC, 586 BC. The prophets that interacted with Israel, Amos, Hosea in the north, Jeremiah in the south, Ezekiel, they effectively, on behalf of God, prepared Israel for what they would encounter in the diaspora. Now, I think Israel was sent out knowing that God knew that Israel would encounter the heathens, the goyim of the nations, and how difficult it would be for them. Just the pressure of going out as a small countercultural entity in a much broader, more powerful culture is immense pressure, right? The tendency to surrender, to embrace the broader culture is immense. And God knew that Israel would face this. And we see here in Jeremiah chapter 10, if you would read that for us. In Jeremiah chapter 10.
It's a good thing I have it handy. Hear the word of which the Lord speaks to you, O house of Israel. Thus says the Lord, do not learn the way of the nations, and do not be terrified by the signs of the heavens, although the nations are terrified by them. For the customs of the peoples are delusion, because it is wood cut from the forest, the work of the hands of a craftsman with a cutting tool. They decorate it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers, so that it will not totter. That's 1 through 4.
Yeah. So many people read that and say, well, clearly it's referring to a Christmas tree. And it probably is. But what is God doing? He's preparing Israel to not be overwhelmed by what they would encounter among the heathens and their practices. So God is providing exhortations, encouragement from the prophets, Jeremiah in this case, to be among the nations, but do not be a part of what they're doing, to be separate in the midst of the nations, to be a people set apart, to be an am segula, a peculiar people, treasured people. And so this was Israel's difficulty. Now, how is Israel as a nation in the diaspora? How have they fared? Fairly well, but there was always also the reality of capitulation, simulation, embracing some of the paganism of, for instance, Christmas. Now, this particular chapter here in Jeremiah chapter 10, 1 to 4, the word wood is used there in the New American Standard, but the Hebrew word is etz. And the word etz is used for trees or tree 146 times, compared to the word etz being used for wood 111 times. So in the context that Jeremiah chapter 10, 1 to 4 is presented, the rest of it actually, it's clearly talking about something, an activity on behalf of the heathens, where they would cut down a tree and they would decorate it and they would revere it. Of course, as Israel went into the Nordic countries, they experienced this firsthand in the Nordic countries, among the Germanic tribes, among the Gauls and the Celtics, the pagan peoples. They experienced that, where these people were part of their ritual during the winter solstice. They would cut these trees, and what was the significance of the evergreen, of the tree? Well, it was the hope that we will get through this horrible period of winter solstice. People were dying during that time of the year, sickness and cold, misery, no sunlight, and an evergreen represented hope that we will get through this. Of course, they would light these trees up with decorations, and even candles also represented the hope of light to come. Because during this time of the year, things are very dark, right? The winter solstice, between the 21st of December to the beginning of January, that period of time is the darkest period of the time, especially in the north. So the Christmas tree, what became known as the Christmas tree, simply represented to the pagans their pagan rituals, but Israel was to stay away from it, have nothing to do with it. Don't be influenced by it. So this is a pressure among God's people to be among a much greater cultural sea of people, and not be a part of it, to stand out. That's an incredible pressure. And so the question begs for understanding as to how do you deal with that. Well, you have to remain a person of God. You have to, first of all, I think you have to count the cost. I think that's the first thing you must do. Count the cost. And Jesus said something about that, and I have a verse prepared for you here, Jim, in Luke chapter 14, 26 to 30. So we have to be able to recognize that this is going to cost us. This is a heavy stone to carry. It's going to be costly. But we have to be prepared to carry that stone and know that there's going to be a toll on us, a toll sociologically, in terms of relationships in general. We're going to have a toll to pay, but we should be prepared to do it. So let's read what Jesus said about counting the cost.
If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who observe it begin to ridicule him, saying, "This man began to build and was not able to finish."
Count the cost. Now, I want to get feedback from you guys. How do you deal with this? How do you deal with the immense social pressure, the cultural pressure, your family? What do you do? I know what I do. How do you deal with it?
So I don't know. I mean, I tend to just, I don't have, there's the office parties and all that kind of stuff, right? The Christmas parties. And I'm not much of a party person, so that's okay. I'm fine.
So you're being a little right conservatively of, who do you say?
Attila the Hun.
Attila the Hun. That's your words, right?
Yep, those are my words.
You don't care.
Right.
So what?
So one of the things that has always bothered me is when you look at atheists who think that Christianity is just nonsense, right? Mm-hmm. They get upset. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, but if you think that I believe in nonsense, why are you upset?
Right.
You should just ignore me.
So the question does point to that even people in the world would treat you like it says here, like you're from another world, like you're an alien.
Yep.
So yeah, even people in the world would condemn you. So you're a quagmire, right?
Right.
From the standpoint of a Christian, you're Antichrist. Mm-hmm. From the standpoint of someone in the world, you're just weird, right?
Right.
So you struggle with that. But Jim, you're not as far right as Dolores is. She's right of Attila the Hun. You're probably a little left of Attila the Hun. How do you deal with it?
I had to find common ground that I could share with them. So I was commenting earlier that when things are biblical, even though it's the wrong time of the year, thank God that they're biblical. And I was teaching when I had revelation with the Lord. It was still expected of me to do programs, have my groups sing around town during the holidays. And so I would just deliberately do biblical literature. There's a lot of Christmas songs that are biblically correct. So we didn't do Santa Claus and elves,
Right.
No, you also I guess you can say moonlighted, or you also worked at a famous Italian restaurant singing.
Right.
And at Christmas time, people give wonderful bonuses, and they want to hear you sing something about Christmas. So how did you deal with that? Put you on the spot.
No. That's quite all right. I got asked often also to sing Ave Maria.
Ah, yes.
Often. Mm-hmm. And I would have to say to people, you do know that's a religious song. Is it? Is it? Is it? I was floored that they would say, is it?
Did you sing it?
No.
So,
that doesn't cross my lips. And I sang in Italian at the Italian restaurant.
Right.
And so for me to learn new literature for 2 weeks out of the year was just not feasible. Right. So I just say, I don't know anything in Italian that's,
Yeah. Well,
but I did have a motorcycle group come in. They wanted me to sing, "What's the matter, you? You gotta know respect."
Well, it's not so bad. It's a nicer place.
So I probably had it easier than you because, being Latin, we had no Santa Claus. In Cuba, there was no such thing as Santa
Really?
Claus, right? Well, our thing was, Christmas was just you went to church and you had a big meal. right? Usually
Family.
neighbors, all that stuff. What we did was on the Feast of Epiphany, January 6th, we had Three Kings Day, right?
Right.
So you would put, as a child, you'd put water, hay, and candy under your bed, and the thought was the kings came in the middle of the night, watered the camels, and fed them the hay, and the kings got the candy, and they would leave you toys under your bed. So that's what we did, right? So I come to the U.S., and there's this thing called Santa Claus, this
Right.
thing I've never heard of. I'm
Right.
like, what the heck is Santa Claus?
Right.
And because of that, I think even my kids, I never really did that whole Santa Claus thing because it never connected in my mind,
Yeah.
right?
So sorry to go off on a tangent, but the Three Kings thing is not just Cuban. It's kind of
It's Latin America.
Caribbean,
Yeah.
Latin.
Iberian.
Yeah.
Because on occasion, my students would bring it up, and I'd say, there were a lot more than three kings, and it would just wipe them out.
So I remember.
You get biblical and say, wait, this was a caravan. They're carrying gold across the desert.
But what you said brought up an interesting point. So you have south of the border, in the Caribbean, south of the border, you have a completely different culture.
Right.
So 100 years ago, before Christmas became very American, right? Christmas is very, very American, invented in this country. As we know Christmas, there's Santa Claus, gift gives, and commercialization. It's very American. So before the mid-1800s, you had much of the Americas celebrating
The Feast of Epiphany.
then
Three Kings
celebrating Christmas, right? So Christmas is a newcomer, Johnny
Right.
come lately on the scene,
Yeah.
but it has taken over the scene completely.
Right,
So
right.
there's this pressure in places like, Cuba and other parts of South America where you have the American Christmas,
Right.
which is all about Santa Claus and all of the stories that goes along with it. Very little to do with Jesus,
Right.
and you have the pressure. Like let's say in Brazil, you have the same type of celebrations because it's Iberian, Portuguese, Spanish. But Brazil wants to be very American. That's their thing, right? They want to be like America. That's why there's so many of them that live over on the west side of town because they believe that Disney World is about America. So they want to be American. They want to identify with America. And so they have to embrace Christmas the way we do and maintain their
Right.
culture. So they have dual cultural. So it must be even harder for them to walk away from Christmas or from Three Kings.
So I remember the last Christmas that we celebrated in Cuba. We slaughtered a pig because that's, roast pork is the meal. And we
Hey, Jesus was born at this time of the year. Let's eat a pig.
and we cooked it on the spit. And then what happens is you have that's on the 24th when you do your big meal, right? And then you go to midnight mass, which is the rooster mass. Don't ask me why, but that's the midnight mass. Everybody goes to midnight mass, right?
Because there's a street light and the rooster's crowing at midnight.
And then the next morning is Christmas, and
Right.
it's more about. I don't remember anything happening on Christmas Day, right? I remember Christmas Eve. I don't
Yeah.
remember
Right.
Christmas Day, and then I remember Three Kings Day, right?
Which is a week later,
Yes, 6 days. January 6th is Three Kings. It always falls on
as they
January
hurriedly
6th.
traversed the desert.
Yep. And at least it's biblical, right? It didn't all happen at the same time.
Right,
took
at least
time
it
for the
didn't all
kings to
happen
get
at the same
And I
time.
still remember that my last Christmas in Cuba, supplies are really in short demand, right? Because there's nothing. It's communism. There's no food. There's nothing. I couldn't find hay. It was, to me, it was traumatic. I couldn't find hay. And finally, one of our neighbors found some hay for me, and I got some hay under my bed, right? So that's what I remember of Christmas.
Sure.
This whole Santa Claus and, all the craziness that goes with the U.S., it was not me. And then I remember when my kids were little, when my first two kids were little, right? We tried to do the American thing of taking your kids to the mall and having them sit on Santa's lap and tell Santa what they want. And my kids screamed.
They always do, especially if they're really little. And
Yes.
at any other time of the year, you wouldn't let some fat guy in a red
Exactly.
suit anywhere near your children.
Yes. So that was it. I have one picture of one of my kids with Santa Claus and nothing else because my kids screamed their heads off and I'm like, I'm not ever doing this again.
Right.
Well, from my perspective, any fat guy that giggles when a child is on their lap, you might be
There's a
suspect of
problem,
that
yeah.
person. So the cultural pressures in Latin America is the same. It's just a different
Right.
different
Right.
type of Christmas. So I think to get back to the question, I empathize with the person. I empathize with the nature of the question
Sure.
quite a bit because it's something that I had to walk through. So how did I deal with it? You just had to deal with it. I think that's what I would say. You have to grind it out. You have to deal with it. You have to overcome. And when you grind it out, when you deal with it, it strengthens you. It gives you resolve because you have to have the strongest resolve about this because the whole culture is set to condemn anyone who stands apart. And this is the predicament of Israel in the diaspora. And in many cases, Israel would compromise. Hanukkah became a feast of lights. That
Right.
relates to the winter solstice as well and to the celebration of Christmas.
Right.
But you know, God ordained that Israel should be an Am Segula, a peculiar people, a precious people, a people set apart. And they will never escape that. The gifts and callings are irrevocable. And no matter how much Israel attempts to, the Jewish nation, attempts to compromise or to identify, they will always stand apart. And that's just the history of Israel. As Bible-believing Christians, you can be a Christian, right? You can be a Christian that will condemn another Christian for not celebrating Christmas or Easter. But as Bible-believing Christians, you will find yourself invariably in the same camp as Israel. Being ostracized, being condemned, being set apart, if you're biblical. So the option here is to be biblical or not to be biblical. There's a Shakespeare thing there somewhere. to embrace the Bible or not embrace the Bible. That's the pressure,
Different
right?
issue.
Yeah.
That's the pressure.
So I think it's bigger. We're all still sorting these things out, and I have been thinking on these things. We're at the season, right? But there's an identity that goes with maintaining the Christian festivals versus the identity that you acquire maintaining the biblical festivals.
Right.
And I want the biblical identity. And it's important enough to me to abandon the Christian identities.
Yeah, well, you know, for anyone that's looking at this, that you're suddenly affronted by what these strange people are saying, if you just turn us off, that's fine. You can smash that, you know, button right now, and we're gone. But if anything we've said has tweaked you or caused you some concern or interest, you need to just take a few moments and do any historical research on biblical Christianity, not Christianity of the 4th century onwards. That's post-biblical Christianity. So conventional Christianity that came into existence after the Council of Nicaea, subsequent councils, anything goes. You can celebrate Christmas, you can celebrate Kwanzaa, you can celebrate Hanukkah, you can celebrate anything. It fits. Because that Christianity became global, embracing every possible global influence. Now, prior to that form of Christianity, you have biblical Christianity, where the Bible becomes the final arbitration of truth and what you believe and what you practice. Not just what you believe, but what you practice. So if you want to understand what biblical Christianity was like, it did exist for 400 years. I read that a Catholic theologian, or Byzantine theologian, in the 5th century said that for 4 centuries, the first 4 centuries of Christianity, they were referred to as the Nazarenes, or Nazarene in Hebrew, and they were very biblical. They were called Judaizers eventually because the Byzantine church had to find some justification to annihilate the 1st century church, 2nd, 3rd century church. So that became the practice. Subdue, put aside anything that's grounded in the book of Acts church, and prop up and support the new imperial church, the Catholic church. And so that has happened. If you want to understand what the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century church practiced, you can find it. You can determine what they did. It's difficult because the history has been erased. But you can determine, you can discover it. It's not difficult anymore. The historical evidences are there. And from what I've seen and many others, we didn't celebrate any pagan festivals. We celebrated biblical festivals, and we were grounded in the reality of the Word of God, and we were not ashamed of it. We were not ashamed of it. We were considered Judaizers, and we were anathema because of it, but many people gave their lives for it. They were that committed. So you have to be grounded and committed in the knowledge that what you believe is biblical. And if it is, there's no force in the universe that can deter you, except you yourself, except your own fears and concerns. Now, one last point about Christmas. It only lasts 3 weeks, and then it's gone. Gone for at least another 11 and a half months or so. So you can suffer through it. You can endure all of the insults. You can endure all of the innuendo, all of the pressures that comes from family members, friends, and business partners, and so on. You can suffer through it. Or you can do what some do, which is just to blink at the pressure, to just overcome it. Suffer through it at any rate. It's only a few weeks. We're not in a place yet where there's an institutional imperial church that wants to lop your neck off because you don't believe the way they do. So see the rejection and the innuendo and the contempt as temporary. It's not that significant, at least not now. It wasn't always that way. and enjoy being biblical. You know, I meet with family and friends. I
Sure.
do some things, and
Yeah.
I'm not legalistic about this. I don't call anyone a pagan because they celebrate Christmas. I don't, and that's just my position. If you celebrate Christmas, do so as a believer in the Bible. If you are doing anything by faith, then you're not necessarily in a bad place. Now, if you're a pagan and you're laughing at Christians who are celebrating Christmas because you understand the true identity of Christmas and you practice that, then I'm not going to condemn you, but I'll ask you to repent because that's the way of the devil. But folks, we don't have to heap a lot of pressure on ourselves about being countercultural. We don't have to necessarily feel bad about it, be ashamed of it. Be convinced, be encouraged that you're biblical, you're standing on the Word of God, and you're in a good place. Even if you're not culturally accepted, if you're rejected and despised and looked upon as an antichrist or an alien, you're standing on God's Word. You have favor with God. It is better to have favor with God than favor with culture.
Well, that's our program. And until next week, shalom.
Shalom.